The slap echoed through the deserted parking garage like a gunshot. Officer Derek Simmons' palm connected with Jasmine Mitchell's face with such force that her head snapped sideways. "You don't tell me what to do," he snarled, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. But what happened next would change both their lives forever. 1 second, Simmons was towering over her with a smirk of satisfaction. The next, he was sprawled across the concrete, staring up in shock as Jasmine stood over him, perfectly balanced in a fighting stance he'd never seen before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jasmine Mitchell hadn't planned on making headlines that cold Tuesday morning. The 34-year-old single mother of two had simply been trying to get to her job at Memorial Hospital, where she worked as a trauma nurse. The routine traffic stop for an allegedly broken taillight shouldn't have escalated, but Officer Simmons seemed determined to make her day miserable from the moment he approached her window. "License and registration," he had demanded without even a cursory greeting. His partner, Officer Reynolds, hung back by their patrol car, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Jasmine complied immediately, her movements deliberate and calm despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Every black woman in America knew that traffic stops could turn deadly in seconds. "Step out of the vehicle," Simmons ordered after barely glancing at her documentation. "May I ask why, officer?" Jasmine kept her voice steady, professional, the same voice she used to calm panicked patients in the ER. "Because I said so," Simmons replied, his hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "Don't make this difficult." Jasmine stepped out slowly, her hospital ID badge clearly visible on the lanyard around her neck. Her scrubs were clean and pressed, her Toyota Camry was well maintained. There was no legitimate reason for the escalation, but she knew better than to point this out. "I'm going to be late for my shift at the hospital," she said quietly. "I'm a trauma nurse." Simmons snorted. "Sure you are." His eyes traveled over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "Hands against the car. I'm going to search you." Officer Reynolds finally spoke up from behind him. "Derek, I don't think that's necessary. Her documentation checks out." "Did I ask for your opinion?" he snapped without turning around. "I smell marijuana. That gives me probable cause." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jasmine's heart pounded. There was no marijuana. She didn't even take Tylenol unless absolutely necessary. But she knew the phrase, "I smell marijuana," had become a magic incantation for officers who wanted to conduct searches without real cause. "Officer, I don't use drugs. I'm a healthcare professional," she said, still keeping her voice level despite the tremor of fear she felt. "You can call the hospital to verify my employment if you need to." "Hands on the car." Each word was punctuated with escalating anger. Reluctantly, Jasmine complied, placing her palms against the cool metal of her car. Reynolds watched with growing discomfort but remained silent as his partner began an inappropriately thorough pat-down that crossed every professional boundary. When Jasmine flinched away from his touch, Simmons grabbed her arm with bruising force. "Stand still or I'll have to restrain you." "You're hurting me," Jasmine said, her professional composure finally cracking. "And this search is inappropriate." What happened next was captured by 3 different angles: Reynolds' body camera, the dashboard camera in the patrol car, and the cell phone of a woman nearby coffee shop who had recognized a dangerous situation unfolding and started recording. Simmons spun Jasmine around and slapped her across the face, hard enough that the sound carried across the parking lot. "You don't tell me what's appropriate," he snarled. Time seemed to slow down. The sting of the slap radiated across Jasmine's cheek. But something else was radiating through her body too. A calm, focused energy she hadn't accessed in years. In one fluid motion, so fast that Reynolds would later describe it as like something from a movie, Jasmine executed a perfect sweep kick that took Simmons's legs out from under him. As he fell, she trapped his arm in a joint lock that immobilized him against the pavement. She applied just enough pressure to control, not to damage. The entire takedown took less than 2 seconds. "What the?" Simmons sputtered from the ground, his face contorted with shock and rage. Officer Reynolds stood frozen, his hand hovering near his weapon, clearly unsure how to proceed. The woman filming from the coffee shop gasped loudly enough to be heard on the recording. "I am a trauma nurse," Jasmine said calmly, maintaining the hold with expert precision. "I'm also a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a former defensive tactics instructor for Memorial Hospital's security team. I didn't want trouble, Officer Simmons. I just wanted to get to work." She looked up at Reynolds, her expression professionally neutral despite the red handprint blooming on her cheek. "Officer Reynolds, I'm going to release your partner now. I would appreciate if you could call your supervisor to the scene. I'll be filing a formal complaint, and I want everything documented properly." Reynolds nodded slowly, his shocked expression giving way to something that looked almost like relief. He reached for his radio with a shaking hand. Jasmine carefully released Simmons and stepped back, keeping a safe distance but making no attempt to flee. She knew that running would only make things worse, regardless of the circumstances. Simmons scrambled to his feet, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "You're under arrest for assaulting a police officer," he sputtered, reaching for his handcuffs. "Derek, stop," Reynolds said sharply. "The cameras caught everything, all of it." He gestured toward his body camera, which was blinking with its red recording light. Simmons froze, his eyes darting between his partner and Jasmine. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. "I acted in self-defense after being assaulted," Jasmine stated clearly, her voice carrying for the benefit of the recording devices. "I used reasonable force to protect myself from harm and then disengaged immediately. I'm not resisting, and I'm not a threat." The next hour unfolded in a blur of activity. The patrol sergeant arrived, followed by a lieutenant. The woman from the coffee shop approached hesitantly, offering her cell phone video as evidence. 2 other bystanders came forward with recordings. Jasmine was questioned repeatedly, her statement taken with meticulous detail. Throughout it all, she maintained her composure, explaining her training background and her instinctive response to being struck. "I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to stop the assault." Officer Simmons was escorted to a separate patrol car, his protests growing increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted against him. Reynolds provided his statement with reluctant honesty, admitting that his partner had escalated the situation without cause and had struck Jasmine unprovoked. By noon, the videos had begun circulating on social media. By evening, they had gone viral nationwide. The hashtag #NurseNinja began trending as millions watched the footage of a black woman defending herself with extraordinary skill and restraint against police brutality. What the public didn't know, what would only emerge in the days that followed, was that Jasmine Mitchell wasn't just any nurse with martial arts training. Her story and the reasons behind her perfect defensive technique would soon captivate the entire country. 3 days after the incident in the parking lot, Jasmine Mitchell sat in the office of Police Chief Robert Wilson, surrounded by department officials, her attorney, and representatives from the hospital administration. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish smudge, but the videos of her takedown had only gained momentum, accumulating millions of views worldwide. "Miss Mitchell," Chief Wilson began, his expression grave. "First, let me extend my sincere apologies for Officer Simmons' conduct. His actions were inexcusable and do not reflect the values of our department."
Jasmine nodded but remained silent. Her attorney, Maya Rodriguez, a razor-sharp civil rights lawyer who had offered her services pro bono after seeing the videos, spoke instead. "We appreciate the sentiment, Chief Wilson, but apologies don't address the systemic issues that led to this incident. Officer Simmons has a documented history of excessive force complaints, particularly against women of color, yet he remained on patrol duty with access to vulnerable citizens." The chief shifted uncomfortably. "Officer Simmons has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I can assure you that—" "He's been placed on paid leave 6 times before," Rodriguez interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. "Each time, he was eventually returned to active duty with minimal consequences. What makes this time different?" "The videos," admitted one of the department officials, a middle-aged woman who had been introduced as the Internal Affairs Director. "The evidence is unambiguous. So accountability only matters when actions are captured on camera? Rodriguez pressed. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. I'm not interested in ruining Officer Simmons' life. What I want is change, real, meaningful change in how officers are trained and held accountable. The room fell silent. Chief Wilson studied her with newfound curiosity. You mentioned to the responding officers that you have extensive defensive tactics training. Our background check shows you were more than just a hospital security instructor. Jasmine exchanged glances with her attorney, who gave a slight nod. I served 8 years as a military police officer in the Army, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan. My specialty was training personnel in non-lethal defensive tactics. After my honorable discharge, I went to nursing school and continued teaching defensive techniques part-time. This revelation shifted the energy in the room. Several of the police officials sat up straighter, their expressions changing from defensive to respectful. That explains the technique, murmured one of the officers. Perfect execution, minimal force. I've been trained to neutralize threats without causing unnecessary harm, Jasmine explained. When Officer Simmons struck me, muscle memory took over. I didn't stop to think, I just reacted the way I was trained to. Chief Wilson leaned forward. Miss Mitchell, would you consider working with our department? We clearly need better training in de-escalation and appropriate use of force. Someone with your background, military police experience, healthcare perspective, and defensive tactics expertise could offer valuable insight. Rodriguez looked skeptical. Chief Wilson, are you offering my client a job to avoid a lawsuit? Not at all, Wilson replied firmly. The department will fully accept responsibility for Officer Simmons' actions. We'll cooperate with any civil proceedings Miss Mitchell wishes to pursue. This is a separate matter, a genuine opportunity to improve our training protocols. Jasmine considered the offer. She hadn't planned on becoming an activist or a police consultant. She was a nurse, a mother, a woman who had simply been trying to get to work. But perhaps this was an opportunity to create something positive from a traumatic experience. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I have conditions. Any program I developed would need to address implicit bias directly. It would need to have measurable outcomes and real accountability. And Officer Simmons would need to face actual consequences, not just a paid vacation and a slap on the wrist. Wilson nodded slowly. Those seem like reasonable terms. We can discuss specifics. The door to the conference room burst open and a young officer rushed in, looking flustered. Sorry to interrupt, Chief, but there's something you need to see immediately. He placed a tablet on the table, displaying a news website with a breaking story. Exclusive. Officer Derek Simmons linked to multiple unreported assaults against women of color. Whistleblower provides evidence. The headline was accompanied by a photograph of Officer Reynolds, Simmons' partner, standing next to an attorney at a press conference. The room erupted in chaos. Chief Wilson snatched up the tablet, his face darkening as he scanned the article.
The Internal Affairs Director was already on her phone, barking orders. The department's attorney began frantically taking notes. Jasmine and Rodriguez exchanged glances. This changed everything. The article detailed how Reynolds had come forward with evidence that Simmons had systematically targeted women of color during traffic stops for years, often with inappropriate searches and occasionally with physical intimidation. Reynolds admitted to remaining silent out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of retaliation. But Jasmine's skilled defense and the subsequent viral videos had finally pushed him to speak out. 16 incidents, Chief Wilson muttered, scrolling through the article. All documented in Reynolds' personal notes. God help us. Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that the truth was emerging, anger that it had taken so long, and a strange sense of purpose taking root. Her defensive move in that parking lot hadn't just protected her from a single act of violence, it had cracked open a door that had been firmly shut for years, allowing light to shine on a pattern of abuse that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. As the officials huddled in urgent discussion, Rodriguez leaned over to whisper to her client, "This is bigger than we thought. Are you ready for what comes next? Once this story fully breaks, you'll be at the center of a national conversation about police reform." Jasmine took a deep breath, thinking of her children, her patients, and all the women's stories that had been silenced before a camera happened to be recording at the right moment. "I didn't ask for this platform," she said quietly, "but now that I have it, I intend to use it." The following days would prove just how significant that platform would become as Jasmine Mitchell transformed from a viral sensation into something much more powerful, a catalyst for change in a system that had resisted reform for generations. Her story was just beginning, and the impact of those 2 seconds in a parking lot would ripple through police departments across the nation, challenging long-standing assumptions about power, protection, and who exactly was keeping whom safe. The news of Reynolds turning whistleblower against his partner spread like wildfire across national media. By the following morning, the story had evolved from a viral video of a self-defense incident to a full-blown scandal exposing years of systematic abuse within the police department. Jasmine Mitchell found herself thrust into the spotlight, her face appearing on morning shows, evening news, and social media feeds everywhere. As she sat in her modest living room, watching yet another news segment about the nurse who fought back, her phone rang for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Mom, it's CNN again," said her 15-year-old daughter, Zoe, holding out the phone with an expression somewhere between awe and anxiety. "And the Washington Post emailed. They want an exclusive." Jasmine sighed, reaching for the phone but not taking it. "Let it go to voicemail, honey. We need some breathing room." Her 13-year-old son, Marcus, looked up from his tablet. "Mom, you're trending again. There's a remix of your takedown with music behind it. It has 12 million views already." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the surreal turn her life had taken. 5 days ago, she had just been another healthcare worker, head down, focused on her patients and her children. Now she had unwittingly become the face of a movement. The doorbell rang, and Zoe rushed to peek through the curtains. "It's Mrs. Robinson from next door. Should I let her in?" Jasmine nodded gratefully. Eleanor Robinson was a retired judge who had lived next door for nearly a decade, watching Zoe and Marcus grow up. If anyone could offer sound advice in this maelstrom, it would be her. Eleanor entered carrying a casserole dish, her silver hair immaculately styled despite the early hour. "I figured you wouldn't have had time to cook," she said, placing the dish on the coffee table. Then she took in Jasmine's exhausted expression and added, "Or sleep, from the looks of it." "I don't know what I'm doing, Eleanor. I'm a nurse, not an activist. I have no idea how to handle all this attention or what to do with it." Eleanor settled into an armchair, her posture still carrying the dignity of her years on the bench. "Let me tell you something about moments like this, Jasmine. They choose you, not the other way around. 30 years on the bench, I saw it time and again. Ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. But what am I supposed to do? Every reporter wants a statement. Police reform organizations want me to speak at rallies. The hospital administration is worried about liability. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since that video went viral." Eleanor's expression softened. "First, you breathe. Then you remember who you are and what matters to you. The noise will continue whether you engage with it or not. The question is how you want to shape the narrative, if at all." Jasmine glanced at a framed photograph on the mantel, herself in military uniform standing beside her unit in Afghanistan. Another, beside it, showed her nursing school graduation, Zoe and Marcus, then much younger, beaming proudly at her side. "I just want to protect people," she said softly. "That's all I've ever wanted to do, whether in the military, in nursing, or as a mother. But this situation feels so much bigger than me." "It is bigger than you," Eleanor agreed. "But that doesn't mean you can't guide it in a direction that aligns with your values. You have a unique perspective: military service, healthcare experience, and now first-hand knowledge of police misconduct. That's a powerful combination." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maya Rodriguez, her attorney. "Turn on Channel 7, now. Simmons's attorney is making a statement." The television screen filled with the image of a suited man standing on the steps of the police union headquarters, microphones clustered before him. Gregory Palmer, a well-known defense attorney who specialized in representing police officers accused of misconduct, spoke with practiced confidence. While we respect Ms. Mitchell's military service, the video circulating online shows only a fragment of the interaction. Officer Simmons was responding to what he perceived as aggressive non-compliance during a lawful traffic stop. His actions, while perhaps appearing excessive when viewed out of context, were consistent with his training and department protocols. Jasmine felt her blood pressure rising as Palmer continued. Furthermore, Officer Reynolds's allegations are the desperate attempts of a junior officer to deflect attention from his own failures to follow proper procedure. The timing and manner of these accusations suggest collusion rather than genuine whistleblowing. Eleanor's expression hardened as she watched. Classic deflection strategy, attacking the credibility of the victims and witnesses rather than addressing the evidence. The final blow came when Palmer suggested Jasmine's takedown of Simmons demonstrated precisely the kind of physical aggression that necessitated Officer Simmons's defensive measures in the first place. Jasmine muted the television, her hands shaking slightly. "They're turning it around, making me the aggressor." Eleanor nodded grimly. "It's a predictable strategy. Character assassination is easier than accountability." Just then, Maya Rodriguez called. Jasmine put her on speaker. "I assume you're watching this circus?" Maya asked, without preamble. "Yes. What do we do?" "We counter narrative immediately. I've been contacted by 3 women who say they were also inappropriately searched by Simmons during traffic stops. None of them filed formal complaints because they didn't believe they would be taken seriously. With Reynolds' documentation backing them up, we have a pattern we can prove." Eleanor leaned forward. "Ms. Rodriguez, Eleanor Robinson here, I used to sit on the circuit court. Have you considered approaching the State Attorney General's office for an independent investigation? This goes beyond a single department if the internal complaint system has been systematically failing women of color." "Judge Robinson," Maya said, her voice warming with recognition. "That's exactly what I was thinking. In fact, I have a meeting with them tomorrow morning. But Jasmine, we need to decide how you want to position yourself in all this. The media narrative is forming with or without your input." Jasmine looked again at the photographs on her mantle, thinking of the path that had led her here. From a tough childhood in East St. Louis to military service, nursing school, and single motherhood. She had never sought the spotlight, but perhaps it had found her for a reason. "I want to speak," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "Not just about what happened to me, but about the bigger picture, about how the system is supposed to work versus how it actually works, about how we can do better." Maya's voice carried a note of approval. "I think that's the right call. When you're ready, we'll arrange a press conference. Controlled environment, prepared statement, limited questions." After hanging up, Jasmine turned to Eleanor. "Am I making a mistake? Getting involved in something this political could affect my job, my kids." Eleanor reached across and took Jasmine's hand. "There are moments in history when staying silent is the greater risk. This is one of those moments. But you won't be alone, I promise you that." As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. Zoe called out from the hallway, "Mom, it's a lot of people this time." Jasmine went to the window and pulled back the curtain. On her front lawn stood at least 20 women in scrubs, nurses from Memorial Hospital, led by Jasmine's supervisor, Dr. Tamara Chen. They carried a banner that read, "Memorial Hospital stands with Jasmine." Tears sprang to Jasmine's eyes as she opened the door. Dr. Chen stepped forward and embraced her. "We heard about that press conference just now. We wanted you to know that your hospital family has your back." One by one, her colleagues approached with hugs, words of encouragement, and offers of practical support, covering shifts, bringing meals, helping with the children.
These were the women and men who worked alongside Jasmine in the trauma unit, who knew her skill, dedication, and compassion firsthand. As Jasmine invited them in, her phone buzzed with another text. This one was from a number she didn't recognize. Sergeant Mitchell, Captain Sarah Jenkins, U.S. Army MP Corps retired. Saw your story. The military police community stands with you too. Let us know how we can help. Within hours, similar messages began pouring in from veterans groups, nursing associations, women's advocacy organizations, and community leaders. What had started as a traumatic incident in a parking lot was evolving into something else entirely, a rallying point for those who believed in accountability, justice, and reform. That evening, as the impromptu gathering at Jasmine's home began to disperse, Dr. Chen pulled her aside. The hospital board met this morning. They want you to know that your job is secure and they're fully behind you. In fact, they're establishing a new training program on responding to trauma from authority figures, and they want you to head it up once this all settles down. Jasmine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fear of professional repercussions had been gnawing at her since the incident. Thank you, Tamara. That means more than you know. As the last visitors departed, Eleanor remained, helping Jasmine and the children clean up. You see, the retired judge said quietly, you're not alone in this fight. Jasmine gazed around her living room, which hours earlier had felt like a besieged fortress, but now seemed like the headquarters of an unexpected movement. The coffee table was covered with business cards, handwritten notes of support, and offers of assistance from people she'd never met, but who had been moved by her story. I'm beginning to understand something, Jasmine said slowly. This isn't really about me and Simmons anymore, is it? It's about all the women who weren't trained in defensive tactics, who didn't have cameras recording, who filed complaints that went nowhere. Now you're getting it. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Individual cases become movements when they touch on universal truths. Your experience resonates because it confirms what many have long suspected but couldn't prove, that bias affects policing, that power can corrupt, and that accountability is essential. Jasmine's phone buzzed again, an email notification. It was from the mayor's office, requesting a meeting to discuss police reform initiatives. Another notification followed immediately. The governor's press secretary asking if Jasmine would consider serving on a newly formed task force on law enforcement standards. What do I do with all of this? Jasmine wondered aloud, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of opportunities and responsibilities. Eleanor smiled wisely. You start by getting a good night's sleep. Tomorrow you assemble your team, your attorney, your supporters, people you trust. Then you decide what change you want to see and work backward from there.
Later that night, after Eleanor had gone home and the children were asleep, Jasmine sat alone on her porch swing, watching the occasional news van drive slowly past her house. She opened her journal and began to write, not a statement for the press or a speech for a rally, but a letter to herself, a reminder of who she was and what mattered most. I did not choose this moment, she wrote, but I can choose what to do with it. I can choose to use my voice for those who weren't heard. I can choose to transform an act of violence into a catalyst for healing. I can choose to show my children that standing up for what's right is always worth the risk. As she wrote, a clarity began to emerge from the chaos of the past few days. The path forward wasn't about vilifying all police officers or seeking personal vengeance against Simmons. It was about addressing the systems that enabled abuse of power and the cultural factors that made it so difficult to hold wrongdoers accountable. Jasmine closed her journal and looked up at the stars, remembering nights in Afghanistan when the desert sky had seemed infinite with possibility. She had joined the military to protect people, became a nurse to heal them, and now, perhaps, she had been given an opportunity to change the systems that were hurting them in the first place. The spotlight hadn't been her choice, but how she used it would be. And in that realization, Jasmine Mitchell found her purpose. The morning of the press conference dawned clear and cool.
Jasmine stood before her bathroom mirror, carefully applying concealer to the fading bruise on her cheek. She had deliberately chosen not to hide it completely. The visible reminder of what had sparked this movement seemed important somehow, a testament to both vulnerability and strength. Her phone chimed with a text from Maya. "Car arriving in 20 minutes. News van's already setting up outside City Hall. Are you ready?" Jasmine took a deep breath, smoothed down the lapels of her blazer, and squared her shoulders. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was no longer just a nurse, a veteran, a mother. She was becoming something else as well. A symbol, a voice, a force for change. "Ready as I'll ever be," she texted back. As she descended the stairs, she found Zoe and Marcus waiting in the living room, both dressed in their best clothes. "We want to come with you," Zoe announced, her young face serious but determined. Jasmine hesitated. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. The media can be overwhelming, and some of the things being discussed—" "Mom," Marcus interrupted, "we've already heard it all online, and we're part of this too. We want to support you." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, dressed in a judge's severity tempered by grandmotherly warmth. "I'll be with them the whole time," she assured Jasmine. "In the back of the room, away from cameras. But I think it's important for them to witness this moment in your life, in all our lives." Jasmine looked at her children, no longer babies, but young people forming their own understanding of justice, courage, and civic responsibility. Perhaps sheltering them from this process would do more harm than good. "All right," she agreed. "But you stay with Eleanor, and if it becomes too much, you leave immediately. Deal?" They nodded solemnly, and something in their expressions, a mixture of pride and protective concern, gave Jasmine an unexpected boost of courage. She was not just fighting for abstract principles of justice. She was fighting to create a better world for her children to inherit. The ride to City Hall was quiet. Each of them lost in thought as the car navigated through streets that seemed somehow changed, as if the events of the past week had altered the very landscape of their community. Maya met them at a side entrance, clipboard in hand, expression focused. "The room is full," she reported, guiding them through a service corridor. "Every major network, local affiliates, online media, the mayor is here, along with the city council. Police Chief Wilson arrived early with the Internal Affairs Director." Jasmine nodded, absorbing the information while trying to keep her nerves in check. "And Simmons? Reynolds?" "Simmons is not here," his attorney advised against it. "Reynolds arrived early, looking nervous but determined. He's brought additional documentation that he's turning over to the state attorney general's representatives."
They reached a small preparation room where several others waited. Dr. Chen from the hospital, Captain Jenkins, who had texted her support, and two women Jasmine didn't recognize, but whom Maya introduced as former victims of Simmons' misconduct who had agreed to come forward publicly. Jasmine greeted each of them warmly, drawing strength from their presence. These were no longer strangers united by circumstance. They were becoming a coalition, a community bound by shared purpose. 5 minutes, a staff member announced, poking her head into the room. Maya handed Jasmine a folder containing her prepared statement. "Remember, stick to the key points we discussed. This isn't about attacking the entire police department or making this political. It's about accountability, reform, and ensuring what happened to you doesn't happen to others." Jasmine scanned the document, but the carefully crafted words suddenly seemed inadequate. How could typed paragraphs capture the complexity of what had occurred and what needed to change? She set the folder down. "I understand the strategy, Maya, but I need to speak from my heart today. I promise I won't go off message on the core issues, but the words need to be mine." Maya looked concerned but nodded after a moment. "I trust you. Just remember, everything you say will be scrutinized, potentially used against you in both public opinion and any legal proceedings." "I understand the risks," Jasmine assured her, "but authenticity matters here.
People need to see that I'm not just the hashtag or a viral video. I'm a human being who wants constructive change." The door opened, and they were led to the entrance of the press conference room. Through the crack in the door, Jasmine could see the forest of cameras, the sea of faces, the bright lights. Her heart raced, but not with fear, but with the heightened awareness that came before taking significant action. "You've got this," Dr. Chen whispered, squeezing her arm. "We're right behind you," Captain Jenkins added. As the doors opened fully and Jasmine stepped to the podium, the camera flashes erupted in a storm of light. She spotted Eleanor in the back with Zoe and Marcus, their faces solemn but proud. She saw Chief Wilson, looking uncomfortable but attentive. She noticed Reynolds, pale but resolute in the corner of the room. And as she adjusted the microphone and looked out at the assembled crowd, Jasmine Mitchell found her voice, not just the physical ability to speak, but the moral authority that came from standing in her truth. What she would say in the next few minutes would change the conversation about policing in their community and beyond. It would offer a path forward that acknowledged both the necessity of law enforcement and the urgent need for reform. It would honor her own experience while connecting it to a larger struggle for justice that long predated her viral moment. Most importantly, it would transform a single act of self-defense in a parking lot into a movement for systemic change that would eventually protect countless others from the abuse of power she had experienced. Jasmine took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine began, her voice steady despite the wall of cameras before her. "My name is Jasmine Mitchell. I am a trauma nurse at Memorial Hospital, a former military police officer with the United States Army, and a mother of 2 amazing children. 1 week ago, I was on my way to work when a routine traffic stop escalated into something that has now been viewed millions of times online." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the room. "I could stand here today and speak only about what happened to me, about being slapped by an officer sworn to protect and serve, about defending myself using training I received in the military, about the fear and confusion I felt as I was threatened with arrest for protecting my own safety." The room was utterly silent, every reporter leaning forward, pens poised. But this moment calls for something more than just my personal story. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is one visible example of a pattern that has affected countless women, particularly women of color, in our community and across this nation. Jasmine gestured to the 2 women seated beside Maya, Tanya Williams and Lucia Gonzalez, who had come forward with their own stories of mistreatment by Officer Simmons. "These brave women beside me experienced similar misconduct but had no cameras recording, no viral video to validate their experiences. Their complaints were dismissed, minimized, or buried. Today, they deserve to be heard just as much as I do." She turned to acknowledge Officer Reynolds, who sat rigid with tension but met her gaze directly. "I also want to recognize the courage of Officer Michael Reynolds, who has taken the difficult but necessary step of speaking truth about what he witnessed during his time partnered with Officer Simmons. Accountability begins with honesty, even when that honesty comes at great personal cost." Chief Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat as camera lenses swiveled briefly in his direction. "I am not here to vilify all police officers or to suggest that our community doesn't need effective law enforcement. My own military service taught me the value of those who dedicate their lives to protecting others. What I am here to say is that protection must extend to everyone equally, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status." Jasmine took a sip of water, then continued with renewed purpose. "I am calling for 3 specific changes that I believe will help prevent situations like mine from happening again. First, a comprehensive review of how complaints against officers are handled, with transparent reporting to the community. Second, enhanced training on de-escalation techniques and implicit bias recognition, conducted by independent experts rather than internally. And third, the implementation of an early warning system that identifies officers with multiple complaints before patterns of misconduct become entrenched." She looked directly into the main camera. These are not radical demands. They are common-sense reforms that protect both citizens and honorable police officers whose reputations are tarnished by those who abuse their authority. Maya had stepped closer, silently reminding Jasmine to stay on message, but Jasmine wasn't finished. There was something more she needed to say, something that hadn't been in the prepared statement, but that she felt was essential. Before I take questions, there's one more thing I want to address. In the days since the videos went viral, I've been called many things: a hero, a symbol, a fighter. But the truth is simpler and more complicated than those labels suggest. Her voice softened, becoming more intimate despite the crowded room. When Officer Simmons slapped me, I didn't think about making a statement or starting a movement. I reacted based on years of training that most people, especially most women, don't have. My ability to protect myself in that moment was a privilege, not a standard that others should be expected to meet. She saw Zoe and Marcus watching her intently from the back of the room, Eleanor's hands resting protectively on their shoulders. Real justice isn't about celebrating exceptional cases of resistance. It's about creating systems where resistance isn't necessary because abuse doesn't occur in the first place. That's the change I'm fighting for, not just for myself, but for my children and for everyone who deserves to be treated with dignity by those in positions of authority. Jasmine stepped back from the microphone, signaling she was ready for questions. The room erupted, reporters calling her name and waving their hands. Maya stepped forward, taking control of the process, pointing to a woman in the front row. Christine Chen, Channel 7 News. Miss Mitchell, Officer Simmons' attorney has suggested that your military background makes you inherently more aggressive and that you escalated the situation. How do you respond? Jasmine leaned back to the microphone. My military training taught me discipline, restraint, and proportional response, the exact opposite of aggression. I used the minimum force necessary to stop an assault and then immediately disengaged. The videos showed this clearly. Another reporter was selected. James Washington, Tribune. Have you spoken directly with Officer Simmons since the incident? No, I have not, though I would be willing to do so in a mediated setting if it would contribute to healing and reform. The questions continued for 20 minutes, some thoughtful, others clearly designed to provoke a reaction. Throughout, Jasmine maintained her composure, answering with the same measured calm she had shown in the viral video itself. Finally, Maya announced, "Last question," and selected a young reporter from an online news site. Officer Reynolds' documentation revealed a pattern of misconduct spanning years, affecting dozens of women who began coming forward as the story gained national attention. Jasmine found herself navigating a complex new reality, balancing her nursing career, single motherhood, and her unexpected role as the face of a reform movement. She appeared on national news programs, testified before state lawmakers considering police accountability legislation, and met with community groups long frustrated by the lack of progress on issues of bias in law enforcement. Through it all, she maintained her focus on constructive solutions rather than retribution. Her military and medical background gave her unique credibility with both police officers and those critical of law enforcement, a bridge between perspectives that often seemed irreconcilable. 1 month after the press conference, Jasmine stood before a different audience, a classroom of police cadets at the academy where Chief Wilson had invited her to develop a new training module on de-escalation and community relations. The badge you're working to earn represents both power and responsibility, she told them, her voice carrying to the back of the room where Wilson and several senior officers listened attentively. How you balance those two elements will define not just your career, but the safety and trust of the communities you serve. She moved from behind the podium, making eye contact with individual cadets. The most dangerous moment in any police interaction is when an officer feels disrespected or challenged. That feeling, that threat to authority, has led to countless unnecessary escalations, some with tragic consequences. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, but remained engaged. My goal today is not to lecture you about what you're doing wrong before you've even started. My goal is to give you tools to recognize and manage those moments of perceived challenge, to understand the difference between a threat to safety and a threat to ego. For the next hour, Jasmine led the cadets through scenarios and exercises drawn from her military training and adapted for civilian law enforcement. She demonstrated physical techniques for maintaining both safety and dignity during tense encounters. She shared psychological insights on how stress affects perception and decision-making. Most importantly, she treated the cadets with respect while still holding them to the highest standards, modeling the very approach she was advocating they take with the public. When the session ended, several cadets lingered to ask questions or simply thank her. One young woman, barely older than Zoe but with a similar determination in her eyes, approached last. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been following your story since the video went viral. You could have just sued the department and walked away with a settlement. Why are you here, helping us become better officers instead?" Jasmine considered the young cadet thoughtfully. "Because change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from transforming systems from within, from giving people the tools to do better rather than just telling them they've done wrong." The cadet nodded, absorbing this. "My mother was mistreated by police during a traffic stop when I was a kid. That's why I decided to become an officer, to make sure it doesn't happen to other families. But sometimes I wonder if I can really make a difference from inside the system." You can. In fact, that's often the only place real change happens, from people with both the perspective to see what's wrong and the position to do something about it. As she gathered her materials to leave, Chief Wilson approached. That was impressive. The cadets were actually listening, not just going through the motions. They're at the beginning of their careers. This is when patterns form, good and bad. If we can reach them now, before cynicism and group loyalty override their instincts for justice, we have a chance at real change. Wilson escorted her to the parking lot. "The Oversight Committee is set to launch next month. Have you made a decision about chairing it?" The role would be demanding, potentially controversial, and would further thrust her into the public eye. But it would also give her real influence over police practices and accountability measures. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Complete transparency, community representation from the neighborhoods most affected by over-policing, regular public reporting, and direct involvement in reforming the complaint process from start to finish." Wilson didn't hesitate. "Done. The mayor has already approved the budget and authority. We're just waiting on you." As they reached her car, Jasmine turned to face him directly. "There's one more condition, Chief Wilson. This can't be just about Simmons. He's a symptom, not the disease. If I take this on, we're looking at the entire culture. The good, the bad, and everything in between." Wilson held her gaze steadily. "That's exactly why it needs to be you, Miss Mitchell. You see the whole picture, not just the extremes. That perspective is rare and essential if we're going to make lasting change." Jasmine extended her hand. "Then I accept." As she drove home, Jasmine reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past month. From a routine traffic stop to a viral moment of resistance to a platform for systemic change. None of it had been planned, yet somehow it felt like the culmination of everything her life had prepared her for. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "CNN just announced you're heading the new Police Oversight Committee. Mom, you're literally changing the world." Jasmine smiled at her daughter's excitement. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with bureaucratic obstacles, resistance from entrenched interests, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny. But with each step, she was helping create the world she wanted her children to inherit, one where accountability wasn't exceptional, but expected, where protection truly meant protecting everyone. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed a small gathering on her front lawn. Neighbors, hospital colleagues, fellow veterans, and community members holding a handmade banner. "From resistance to reform. Thank you, Jasmine." The path from that parking garage confrontation to this moment of possibility had been unexpected and difficult. But as Jasmine stepped out of her car to embrace her supporters, she understood that sometimes the most powerful change begins not with grand plans, but with a single courageous moment of standing your ground when others would knock you down. 6 months after Jasmine Mitchell became chair of the Police Oversight Committee, the landscape of law enforcement in their city had begun to transform. The changes weren't always dramatic or headline-grabbing, but they were substantive, reshaping interactions between officers and citizens in ways that rippled throughout the community. On a crisp autumn morning, Jasmine stood before a newly installed memorial in Riverside Park, a simple stone monument dedicated to victims of police misconduct and advocates who had fought for reform. The dedication ceremony had drawn a diverse crowd: community activists who had battled for accountability for decades, police officers committed to a new approach to public safety, families affected by past injustices, and ordinary citizens invested in building a better future. This memorial stands not just as a reminder of where we've been, but as a compass pointing toward where we're going. Every name engraved here represents both a failure of our systems and a call to ensure those failures never repeat. Among those names was Timothy Carter, a young black man who had died in police custody 15 years earlier, a case that had sparked protests but ultimately led to no significant changes or accountability. His mother, Evelyn Carter, now in her 70s, stood in the front row, tears streaming down her weathered face.
Jasmine embraced the older woman, understanding the weight of those words. In the months since taking on leadership of the Oversight Committee, she had discovered just how many Evelyns existed in their community. People's pain had been dismissed, whose calls for justice had been ignored, whose faith in the system had been shattered. "The work continues," Jasmine assured her, "and your voice is part of what guides it." Indeed, the committee Jasmine led had made community voices central to its approach. Rather than operating solely from official headquarters, they held regular sessions in neighborhood centers, churches, schools, and public housing facilities. They conducted listening tours in communities historically over-policed and underserved. They created anonymous reporting channels for citizens fearful of retaliation. More importantly, they had implemented concrete policy changes with measurable impacts: body cameras that couldn't be deactivated during encounters with the public, a civilian review process for all use of force incidents, mandatory de-escalation training conducted by experts in mental health and conflict resolution, and an early intervention system that flagged officers accumulating complaints before patterns became entrenched. The road hadn't been smooth. Resistance came from expected quarters. The police union initially fought many reforms, veteran officers resented new oversight, and political forces occasionally attempted to undermine the committee's authority. But Jasmine had navigated these challenges with the same strategic thinking that had served her in military operations and emergency medicine. She built coalitions, finding allies within the department willing to embrace change. She presented reforms not as punitive measures, but as tools to help good officers do their jobs better and more safely. She used data to demonstrate that de-escalation techniques reduced injuries to both civilians and police. And most crucially, she never lost sight of the human element, the fundamental goal of ensuring dignity and safety for everyone involved in police interactions. As the memorial crowd dispersed, Maya Rodriguez approached with a tablet in hand. "The numbers are in for the first 2 quarters," she said, turning the screen toward Jasmine. "Excessive force complaints down 62%. Civilian injuries during arrests down 47%. Officer injuries down 38%. And community satisfaction with police interactions up across all demographics." Jasmine studied the data with cautious optimism. "It's a strong start," she acknowledged, "but we need sustained progress across years, not just months. And we're still seeing racial disparities in traffic stops and discretionary arrests." "Always the perfectionist," Maya smiled. "You know, it's okay to celebrate victories along the way. 6 months ago, nobody thought this level of change was possible." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced down and froze momentarily before showing Maya the headline: "Former Officer Simmons sentenced to 5 years for civil rights violations." The case against Derek Simmons had proceeded on multiple fronts: departmental discipline, civil litigation for multiple victims, and federal civil rights charges.
Today's sentencing marked the culmination of the criminal proceedings, with the judge delivering a sentence that acknowledged the pattern of misconduct while still allowing for eventual rehabilitation. "How do you feel?" Maya asked quietly. Jasmine considered the question carefully. In the whirlwind of reform work, she sometimes went days without thinking directly about the man whose assault had catapulted her into this role. Her focus had expanded far beyond that single incident to encompass systemic change. "I feel validated. Not because he's going to prison, but because the system actually worked the way it's supposed to. Evidence was gathered, testimony was heard, laws were applied fairly. That's what justice should be, consistent and impartial, not dependent on whether a video goes viral." As they walked back toward the committee offices, they passed a police cruiser parked near the park entrance. Officer Michaela Chen, the young cadet who had approached Jasmine after her training session months earlier, was speaking with an elderly man who seemed distressed.
Jasmine paused to observe the interaction. Officer Chen was kneeling to be at eye level with the seated man, her body language open and attentive. She wasn't rushing him or displaying impatience. When he became emotional, she offered tissues and gave him space to compose himself. Eventually, she helped him to his feet and escorted him gently toward the cruiser, not to arrest him, but to drive him home safely. "That's it," Jasmine said softly to Maya. "That's what we're working for." "A traffic stop without violence? Pretty low bar," Maya remarked. "No," Jasmine shook her head. "Policing as caregiving, not just enforcement. Authority exercised with compassion instead of domination. That officer just made our community safer not by controlling someone, but by serving them." Back at committee headquarters, Jasmine found a surprise waiting. Chief Wilson with Zoe and Marcus, who had stopped by after school. "We brought celebratory cupcakes," Zoe announced, pointing to a box on the conference table, "for the 6-month milestone and the good statistics." Marcus, now 14 and increasingly interested in criminal justice issues, was more focused on the Simmons news. "5 years seems light for everything he did," he commented with teenage bluntness. Chief Wilson, who had gradually evolved from skeptical participant to committed reform advocate, addressed the comment thoughtfully. "The goal isn't just punishment, son. It's accountability and change. Simmons will serve his time, but he'll also undergo mandatory retraining and psychiatric evaluation. When he returns to society, he'll never work in law enforcement again, but he'll have skills to contribute positively in other ways." Jasmine noticed how naturally Wilson had adopted the language of restorative justice rather than retribution, a shift from his initial stance when they'd first begun working together. As they shared the cupcakes, the conversation turned to the future. The Oversight Committee's initial mandate was for 1 year, with the option to extend based on results and community feedback. "The mayor wants to make it permanent," Wilson revealed, "with expanded jurisdiction and increased staffing. He's prepared to announce it at the town hall next week." "That's fantastic," Maya exclaimed. "Institutional permanence is crucial for long-term impact." Jasmine nodded agreement but remained pensive. Her dual roles, continuing her nursing career while leading the Oversight Committee, had created a punishing schedule. The work was deeply meaningful, but also consuming. "Mom's been stretched too thin," Marcus observed with surprising perceptiveness. "Working hospital shifts, running the committee, speaking at conferences, plus dealing with all the media attention. Something has to give." Zoe shot her brother an annoyed look. "Why are you saying that? This work is important." "It is important," Jasmine agreed, touching her daughter's hand. "But Marcus isn't wrong. Sustainable change requires sustainable practices, including self-care for the people doing the work." Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. "That's actually another part of the mayor's proposal. The committee chair would become a full-time position with appropriate compensation. You wouldn't have to choose between your nursing career and this work." The offer was tempting. Jasmine had discovered an unexpected talent for institutional reform and policy implementation. The committee work allowed her to help people on a systemic level, potentially affecting thousands of lives rather than one patient at a time. Yet nursing remained her anchor. Tangible, immediate caregiving that kept her connected to the human beings behind the statistics and policies. "I need time to consider it," she told Wilson. "This was never about building a new career for myself. It was about creating meaningful change in how policing works in our community." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jasmine sat on her porch with Eleanor Robinson, who had become both mentor and friend throughout this journey.
They want me to lead the committee permanently, Jasmine confided, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. Full-time, with expanded authority. Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully. And you're hesitant because? Because I never intended to become a professional activist or reformer. Because I'm a nurse. That's my calling. Because I worry about becoming institutionalized, part of the same system I'm trying to change.
When I was on the bench, she said after a moment, I often found myself in a similar position, working within a system that needed reform while trying to maintain the perspective to see what needed changing. How did you manage it? By remembering that systems are made of people. The minute you start seeing only policies, statistics, and bureaucratic structures, you lose the humanity that makes reform meaningful in the first place. Eleanor set down her teacup deliberately. Your nursing background isn't separate from your reform work. It's what makes your approach unique. You treat the police department like a patient, diagnosing systemic illnesses, applying targeted interventions, monitoring progress, adjusting treatment as needed. Jasmine smiled at the analogy. I never thought about it that way. The question isn't whether to choose between nursing and reform. It's how to integrate your healer's perspective into institutional change. Perhaps that means part-time in both worlds. Perhaps it means training others to carry your approach forward. But don't assume these paths are mutually exclusive. The conversation continued late into the night, exploring possibilities rather than fixating on limitations. By the time Eleanor left, Jasmine had begun sketching a different vision for her role, not just as committee chair, but as the architect of a new approach to police reform that centered healing rather than punishment, transformation rather than mere compliance. 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood at a podium in City Hall, the mayor and Chief Wilson beside her, as they announced the permanent establishment of the Community Safety and Healing Commission, an evolution of the original Oversight Committee with an expanded mission and innovative structure. This commission represents a fundamental shift in how we approach public safety, Jasmine explained to the assembled press and community members. We're moving beyond oversight alone to build collaborative models where law enforcement and community health systems work together rather than in parallel. The new commission would integrate police oversight with mental health response teams, substance abuse intervention specialists, housing advocates, and youth mentorship programs, creating a holistic approach to community well-being rather than relying solely on traditional policing. For too long, we've asked police officers to be everything: social workers, mental health counselors, substance abuse specialists, and crisis negotiators, all while maintaining public order and responding to actual crimes. This approach has failed both officers and communities. She outlined how the commission would redirect resources to ensure the right responders for each situation: mental health professionals for psychological crises, substance abuse specialists for addiction issues, mediators for neighborhood disputes, and police officers for situations genuinely requiring law enforcement. This isn't about defunding or diminishing police. It's about defining their role more appropriately and supporting them with partners who bring different expertise. When someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, they need a counselor, not handcuffs. When families are facing eviction, they need housing assistance, not arrest. When young people are struggling, they need mentorship, not juvenile detention. As she concluded her remarks, she acknowledged the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, I defended myself from assault by a police officer. That moment could have ended with anger, retribution, and deeper division. Instead, it has led to this new beginning, a commitment to reimagine public safety as community care. She looked out at the audience, spotting Zoe and Marcus sitting with Eleanor, Dr. Chen with a group from the hospital, and many others who had supported and challenged her along the way. The slap that went viral wasn't the beginning of this story, and today isn't the end. The true measure of our success will be in the daily interactions between officers and citizens, in moments of crisis met with compassion, in conflicts resolved without violence, in communities feeling genuinely protected rather than merely policed.
After the announcement, as people gathered to discuss the new commission, Officer Michaela Chen approached Jasmine with barely contained excitement.
Miss Mitchell, I've been accepted to the dual-track program, law enforcement and social work. I'll be part of the pilot team for the new mental health response unit. Jasmine smiled warmly. That's wonderful news, Officer Chen. You're exactly the kind of bridge builder we need. It's because of you, Chen said earnestly. Watching how you transformed your own trauma into systemic change, it showed me what's possible when we refuse to be defined by our worst moments. As the young officer moved away to join her colleagues, Jasmine felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Officer Reynolds, now promoted to sergeant and heading the department's newly established accountability division. "Congratulations on the commission," he said, extending his hand. "It's a huge step forward." Jasmine shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for your part in making it possible. Your courage in speaking up was a crucial turning point." Reynolds glanced down briefly, still carrying some guilt about his years of silence before the viral incident. "I've been thinking about what you said at the academy last month, about how change happens at the inflection points, the moments when we choose differently than before." "Those moments happen every day," Jasmine affirmed. "In every interaction, every decision, every time we choose courage over comfort or truth over convenience." "Well, your inflection point changed everything, not just for our department, but for policing nationwide. Other cities are already adopting your models." Indeed, Jasmine had begun consulting with police departments and community organizations across the country, sharing the frameworks and methodologies developed in their city. The Mitchell model, as some were calling it, was gaining traction as a practical approach to reform that balanced accountability with transformation, community voice with operational reality. Later that evening, Jasmine returned home to find a package on her doorstep. Inside was a framed photograph of her during the press conference after her viral moment, standing tall despite the fading bruise on her face. Accompanying it was a note from Evelyn Carter. "When they knocked you down, you didn't just stand up, you built a new foundation for all of us to stand on. Thank you for transforming pain into purpose." Jasmine hung the photograph in her home office, not as a reminder of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience, both her own and that of a community, refusing to accept that things couldn't change. 1 year to the day after Officer Simmons had slapped her in that parking lot, Jasmine stood in the same spot. The location had been transformed into a community response center, the first of several planned throughout the city, staffed by crisis counselors, social workers, and specially trained police officers working in collaborative teams. As she cut the ribbon to officially open the facility, Jasmine reflected on the journey, from a single moment of self-defense to a movement for systemic healing. The path hadn't been linear or perfect. Resistance and setbacks continued to challenge their progress, but the direction was clear and the momentum unstoppable. When I defended myself that day, I was drawing on years of training and experience, but the most important lesson I've learned since then is that true safety doesn't come from individual strength alone. It comes from communities that protect each other, systems that serve everyone equally, and healing that transforms rather than punishes. She gazed around at the diverse faces before her, police officers and community activists, local residents and city officials, all united in a commitment to reimagine public safety as an act of collective care rather than control. 1 second changed my life. But what matters more is what we do with all the seconds that follow, how we transform individual moments of courage into lasting change that benefits everyone. As the center opened its doors for the first time, Jasmine Mitchell stepped forward not as a viral sensation or a symbol, but as a builder of bridges between worlds too long divided, showing that sometimes the most powerful response to being knocked down isn't just standing up again, but creating a world where fewer people fall in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.